G'day, May 40 here. So it's become conventional wisdom that one major political party in the United States just rejects democracy. And did you know that democracy itself is on the ballot in 2024? I don't know about you, but my body, my kinesthesia just goes to sleep when I hear these arguments. All right, they are so bogus. Right, they just so lack any substance that I find it impossible to take them seriously. I mean, how on earth do people take that stuff seriously? That democracy itself is on the ballot? It's impossible to take them seriously. Right, so there are many sources of knowledge. Right, one source of knowledge is you get a peer-reviewed study. Right, that may be an excellent source of knowledge. Another source of knowledge is your body's reaction. So some investors, right, they sell a stock when their back starts to ache when they think about that stock, right? You think not just in your brain, right? You also change the way you think when you're out there walking, when you're lying down, when you're talking to other people, when you're standing up as opposed to sitting down, right? There are many ways that we think, and one profound way that we influence truth is by our body reactions. And one famous body reaction, all right, Warren Buffett, right? He sells stocks when he starts to get a back pain, when he thinks about those stocks. And so how our body reacts is often a profound window into something that our brain may not accept. So I tried for years, from 2016 to 2018, I tried to read these news reports about Russiagate and how Russia had short-circuited our democracy, that the Trump administration had cooperated with Russia, and it was dominating the news, right? There were Pulitzer Prizes being handed out for coverage of Russiagate, and so I really tried to decode what was going on. I really tried to read the news articles, and I just found I would just start falling asleep. Now, I also tend to start falling asleep when learning about science or about anatomy, so it's not like I'm not claiming that my body reactions, my lack of interest, is some foolproof guide to truth. No, but it's a beginning. And whenever I hear political rhetoric in the United States in particular, but also in other first world nations, that if you vote for the right-wing party, that you are endangering democracy, that you are risking the end of democracy, my body just gets bored because it's so obviously bogus, right? Because the same people who tell you that democracy is on the ballot and that if Trump gets elected in November of 2024, that this will be the last election in the United States. Right? This is a mainstream talking point in the media and among most elite Democrats commenting on the election. Right? It's absolutely absurd, but it's a dominant way that people talk about this election, that democracy is on the ballot. Right, this is breaking points.
You just mentioned we're hearing from some Biden defenders recently as well.
Well, it's cynical, but it's taking an opportunity presented by some of the more pie-in-the-sky donors who have the ear of journalists and are proposing a blitz convention or a mini convention, coming up with different ways to say, we want Biden gone, but we don't want the black female vice president to take over. It'd be awkward for Richmond to say what he was saying in a context where everyone agreed that next in line is Kamala Harris, who Biden has said is ready, implied by picking her, is ready for the job. And instead, you can see what they're doing is recasting this as a bunch of people who don't understand Democratic Party politics, trying to impose their will on the black, non-white voter base of the party. It is a little cynical. It's also...
Yeah, so Joe Biden's support primarily comes from the Black Congressional Caucus and black voters who are the lowest information voters in the United States, right? Blacks at a lower percentage than whites read the New York Times and the elite media, right? It wasn't a major part of the African-American scene to be sitting around and analyzing the first Trump-Biden debate. And so Biden's supporters come overwhelmingly from low information voters. And those who most want Joe Biden to step down, they are the high information voters, the ones who pay attention to the news and to the debates and to policy.
That's not how Biden won in 2020. He ran as a broadcast candidate who appealed to the whole party and as much
But now he has so tied himself to the Congressional Black Caucus, where nobody's come out and said Joe Biden don't run, that he has set it up so that if you oppose Joe Biden running for the Democratic nomination and then for the presidency of the United States, it means that you're racist, that you're anti-black.
The country as possible, not as a candidate of a faction of the Democratic Party. So it is a little cynical, and you have not seen that. Look at the makeup of the CBC. Look at even progressives in the CBC. One thing, and Ryan, not to put him on the spot, knows more about this, but there has been some reluctance by elected progressives to go after Biden to make it look like a polarized. I have an ideological gripe with the guy. We always have. Bernie Sanders has been very supportive of Biden running, and my interview with him, and then his interview was on Sunday. So
Bernie Sanders is a year older than Joe Biden, but he's still with it, right? He's still cognitively sharp. Joe Biden, not so much.
Really trying to isolate different factions of the party that don't like him, and some of them are going along with it strategically.
Yeah, Dave, we have some interesting new reporting, multiple news outlets. We can put this one up there on the screen. CNN had a pretty detailed write-up here of Hakeem Jeffries convening a call yesterday where we had some 4 Democrats who actually vocally opposed Joe Biden, including Mark Takano, Adam Smith, Jim Hines, Joe Morell, Jerry Nadler, and Susan Wild. Jerry Nadler, I believe one of the highest-ranking folks, or at least most well-known, especially amongst Democrats, actually vocally oppose him in this call. How do you expect that to play out this week on?
So the higher the IQ, the Democrat, the more likely they are to want Joe Biden to step down. The lower the IQ, the Democrat, the more likely they are to support Joe Biden. So Joe Biden has thrown in his lot with those who don't pay much attention to politics, right? Those are his staunchest supporters. Those who aren't really following the news, don't really know what's going on, how he's revealed himself as senile, completely incompetent, completely unfit to be president of the United States, let alone to run for another 4-year term.
On Capitol Hill, are they going to come out with statements like we've seen from some members? Are they going to keep it behind the scenes like it appears Representative Don Beyer did? How do you think that's going to happen?
Well, you saw the Beyer statement is really telling, because Beyer on the call, and I'll be able to describe what he said verbatim, and I confirmed it. On the call was very nervous about Biden. When this was caught out in public.
Sorry, Dave, we can put those comments up on the screen since you're.
So this is how Biden has played this game in the past. All right, this is what he said in the 2012
race. Look at what they value and look at their budget and what they're proposing. Romney wants to he said in the first 100 days, he's going to let the big banks once again write their own rules. Unchain Wall Street. They're going to put you all back in chains.
Right, Joe Biden telling African Americans in 2012 that Mitt Romney, right, milquetoast Mitt Romney, is going to put you all back in chains. All right, that's insane rhetoric.
Party captive. This morning, he sent a ransom note, a letter with a list of demands telling the Democrats he's firmly committed to staying in this race, whether they like it or not.
And so Biden is essentially telling the Democrats, like, I dare you to try to unseat me. And what Democrats are saying privately and what Democrats are saying publicly are completely different, right? He seems to be staring them down, and he seems to be winning in that matchup, right? So normal rhetoric from the left, even the center, is that a second Donald Trump term means authoritarian inclinations unchecked. We've got a civic emergency, that this should supersede any other normal political consideration. This is Jonathan Chait, liberal columnist in New York Magazine. And so if democracy is on the ballot, you'd think that would be the number one priority for Democratic politicians. But to the extent that that goal conflicts with their own self-interest, right? Their own self-interest comes first, right? They don't want the lack of comfort that comes from telling unpopular truths. So in private, Democrats overwhelmingly admit that Joe Biden clearly unfit to be president of the United States, let alone to run for another term. But what they say publicly is completely different, right? And so there's a major schism in the party over how to handle Joe Biden. So numerous Democratic governors, right, want to maximize their chances of winning the presidency in 4 years, right? So they will publicly say, if you vote for Donald Trump, we'll never have another election. But they are pragmatically planning to run for president in 4 more years. They don't feel like running right now against someone who is black and an immigrant, Kamala Harris, that these are sacred identities that other Democrats just don't feel strong enough to run against. I mean, the Democrats have really doubled down on identity politics, throwing in the lot with Kamala Harris, right, who has never proven herself, who folds under pressure, who makes no sense when she's interviewed. And then the press secretary for Joe Biden, right, not exactly the best and the brightest, but she ticks the right identity boxes. All right, she's black, she's lesbian, and not particularly good at her job.
Or not. Stick with me and no one gets hurt. While Democrats are looking around saying, if we stick with you, we all get hurt. If they lose, they're going to lose with him, not with anybody else. It wouldn't be fair to the Democrats who have already voted, Joe says, as if the party cares about voter integrity. Like all hostage negotiations, you bring a family member in to talk the hostage taker down. This morning, Morning Joe tried to talk to the president into releasing the hostages and resigning. It didn't go well.
I am not going anywhere.
So you can hear Joe Biden rustling the pages that he is reading from in this call to the Morning Joe program, right? You can hear the rustle of the pages, right? Just being able to read out loud is not a particularly daunting cognitive test.
I wouldn't be running if I didn't absolutely believe that I am the best candidate to beat Donald Trump in 2024. I'm here for two reasons, pal.
Right. He's reading that. Right. It doesn't come from his heart or his head. He's reading other people's words.
One, to rebuild the economy for hardworking middle-class people, give everybody a shot. Just a straight shot. Everybody gets a fair chance, number one. Number two, remember all this talk about how I don't have the black support? Come on, give me a break. Come with me. Watch. I'm getting so frustrated by the elites. Now, I'm not talking about you guys, but about the elites in the party who they know so much more. But if any of these guys don't think I should run against me, go ahead, announce for president. Challenge me at the convention.
Biden's bunkered up with Hunter holding the party hostage, screaming at Morning Joe about the elites, the very people who put Joe in the White House and have been covering for him. Biden would still be a Delaware senator if it wasn't for the CIA, Obama donors, FBI, and the media, who parachuted him into the presidency during COVID and hid his condition. Biden wanted to be Abe Lincoln so badly, he got himself into a civil war. Like a bunch of Arab Spring breakers, Democrats are gnashing their teeth at the gates of the White House, demanding Joe come out with his hands up.
It's more likely that he'll lose by a landslide than win narrowly this race. And if the stakes are as large as he says, and I believe they are, then he really needs to consider what the right thing to do here is.
Right. For a normal person who is paying some attention to this story, it's absolutely enraging to hear Joe Biden and his enablers and the Democratic Party, right, arguing that this guy is on top of it and that he is capable of going another 4 years. He's not capable of performing the duties of president of the United States right now, let alone in another 4 years. Right? How is any normal person who cares about the health of their own country, the United States of America, not enraged by this farce?
I think he should step aside. I think it's become clear that he's not the best person to carry the Democratic message.
The need for him to step aside is more urgent tonight than when I first called for it on Tuesday. And every day he delays, it makes it more difficult for a new person to come on board who can defeat Donald Trump.
Mr. President, your legacy is set. We owe you the greatest debt of gratitude. The only thing that you can do now to cement that for all time and prevent utter catastrophe is to step down and let someone else do this.
Biden's facing calls to step down from congressional leaders tied to the intelligence community. Top Democrats on intel, judiciary, and armed services are calling for Biden's head. The CIA made Biden, and they're about to break him. The president knows what a coup looks like, and he's left his fate up to the Lord Almighty.
Look, I mean, if the Lord Almighty can...
And that's also infuriating. All right, you're representing a major political party in the United States, and the only person who can encourage you to step down is God.
And I said, Joe, get out of the race. I get out of the race. The Lord Almighty's not coming down.
In politics, there's something more powerful than the Lord Almighty.
So a major difference between Jews and Christians is that Jews believe that direct prophecy, where God comes down and talks to men, ended about 2,200 years ago. Evangelical Christians, many types of Protestants, believe in a much more direct, God-man relationship that goes on to this day. But I don't want the health and best interests of my country, placed in the hands of some unverifiable conversation between Joe Biden and God.
Almighty. And it's the almighty dollar. And just like he can't win without intel, he can't win without donors. Top Hollywood Biden donors have alligator arms. Suddenly they can't find their wallets. They feel deceived by Biden. Actor Rob Reiner says, quote, "It's time to stop effing around. It's time for Joe Biden to step down." The Disney heiress, Abigail Disney.
And Jerry Nadler, who is highly incapacitated. I mean, he looks like death. I mean, he looks horrible. He is just a physical wreck. And I mean, I'm glad he's doing the right thing in asking for Joe Biden to step down. But the problem for many of these politicians is that they are too frail and infirm and senile, right, to be in office themselves, particularly U.S. senators. Right? Some of them have served up until about age 100, Strom Thurmond. It's ridiculous. Dianne Feinstein, she died in office at about age 90, and she was in dramatic cognitive decline the last few years of her life. And so many of them are already too unfit themselves to be in office, and so they are a little frightened to come out and point the finger at Joe Biden in case anyone points a finger back at them.
Netflix CEO Reed Hastings, media mogul Barry Diller, and others aren't going to be held hostage by a president with a 37% approval rating. They're all vowing to pull all donations from Biden and from House and Senate Democrats until Joe's off the ticket. Joe's losing intel, the donors. So what about the media? Binder had a rough one.
Hold on a second. There's no reason to go back and forth and be in this aggressive way.
Miffed around here about how information's been shared with the press corps about him.
What are you missed about? What are you missed about?
Everything he just asked about.
And then every time I come back and I answer the question that you guys asked.
Correctly, then have to come back and clean up.
I never answered the question incorrectly. That is not true. I was asked about a medical exam. I was asked about a physical. That was in the line of question that I answered. And I said, no, he did not have a medical exam, and I still stand by that. Matter of fact, the president still stands by that. He had a verbal check-in. That is something that the president has a couple times a week. A couple times a week.
Don't buy for a second that the media is upset that they've been misled by Biden's condition. They've been in on the cover-up. They see what you and I do. They've never raised his age before. You've seen Biden hold his note cards at press conferences where he gets the questions ahead of time. We've seen.
So if it was only people in right-wing media that talked about a media conspiracy to cover up for Joe Biden, then I probably wouldn't repeat that allegation. But you have Mark Halperin and people in centrist and even center-left media and the Young Turks alleging that there's been a mainstream media cover-up of Joe Biden's rapidly declining condition. So everyone has different incentives, right? My incentives don't exactly align with yours, right? Doing the right thing for all of us, that doesn't always perfectly align with their own best interests. And this is true for congressional Democrats, right? Their incentives don't perfectly align with saving American democracy, right? Now, they know that if Joe Biden drags down the ticket so that Democrats get 10 points, fewer percentage point voters, right, then many of them are going to be out of a job. But most of them realize that due to the polarized nature of the American electorate, that Joe Biden would lose the popular vote by, a maximum of 2 or 3 percentage points. So most of them feel absolutely safe in their seats. So are they mainly concerned about just limiting the drag on the ticket? And they may even look forward to getting more money, more donations, because big money doesn't want to fund Joe Biden. Instead, is pouring money into congressional races. So they see a losing Biden campaign might actually put money into their campaign, right? They don't want to say things publicly that they say privately, because then they get blamed if there's a replacement candidate for Joe Biden and he loses, right? What if Trump wins anyway? Also, they don't want to put their own reputations at risk. So they'll tell us that America is at risk, American democracy is at risk, that if Trump is reelected, we'll never have another election. But they're not going to take a chance on risking their own reputation and their own comfort. Right? Democrats from competitive districts are particularly furious at Biden, right? And they want to call on Biden to drop out of the race, but they're staying quiet because they're not getting much demand from their own unions and their own rank and file voters who are the low information voters. So if you have a district that is dominated by low information, lower IQ voters, you're not going to get much of a demand that Joe Biden drop out, right? This demand is primarily coming from the smartest, most committed, most informed Democrats, while Biden's support primarily comes from the lowest IQ, least informed, least engaged Democrats. So Biden is betting on these petty calculations, right? He's not trying to convince Democrats that he's their best nominee. He's just daring them to go public with their desire to replace him, and then he's seeking to maximize their professional and personal discomfort by exploiting the Democrats' commitment to racial justice, right? Biden keeps emphasizing his support from black voters. And it's kind of a strange argument in that the polls showed that his low support among black voters is one of many reasons why Biden is losing against Trump. But overall, black voters are less critical of Biden's cognitive abilities than white voters are. Doesn't make black voters enthusiastic, right? A majority of black voters say Joe Biden is too old to be an effective president. So let's get a little bit more coverage here from Jesse.
Seen that? CNN's top doctor, Sanjay Gupta, has been saying for years Biden seems fit, no need to take a cognitive test. Suddenly, now he wants a test.
I think that the question really being raised is, have we been looking at episodes, intermittent episodes, or is this reflective of some sort of deeper underlying condition? If he were my dad, frankly, I would want to get more testing done, cognitive testing and more detailed movement disorder testing as well.
This morning, the media said, Mr. President, everything will be okay. Just come out, take a cognitive test. Once we get the results, we can all go home safely like nothing happened.
Have you been tested for any age-related illnesses, pre-Parkinson's, or anything like that that might explain sort of having a night like that where you couldn't finish sentences?
Look, I had a bad night, but the fact of the matter is, look at what I'm doing. I mean, let me put it this way. If there was something that was wrong that night, it's not like it comes and that's one night and it goes away.
Okay, so Joe Biden making the most cynical of calculations, and it takes my breath away how reluctant Democrats are to match their public commentary with their private commentary.
Referencing, put B5 up, guys. Just while you're talking, we can take a look at those, because on the call he said he's very, very fragile. His handshake is firm, but he really has trouble putting two sentences together. I believe Kamala's in a great position to win, better position than Joe. My perfect world is Joe steps aside now, lets Kamala run as the incumbent. But once these comments came out, then he ran away from them at 1,000,000 miles per hour.
Yeah, you could hear the flop sweat splashing off of the cleanup comment. And I don't think many Democrats want to embarrass themselves that way. You saw what happened with Mark Warner's meeting. It was leaked that he was going to meet with senators about this, and then that meeting is not going to happen. That doesn't mean a different kind of meeting won't happen. But there's not the confidence. I think what people who wanted Biden gone were trying to will into the existence was a new version of the sort of Watergate mythos where Republican senators went to Nixon and told him his position was untenable. Remember Nixon's position being untenable in a Democratic majority House and Senate.
All right, this is David Weigel speaking, and he has often said some of the most courageous things from any mainstream journalists in Washington, D.C.
Was different with the one Democrats face now. That happens a lot with Democratic elites, where they say, well, I saw this in a history book, or I saw this in the West Wing. That effort, it doesn't matter if Biden himself is convinced and his family is convinced that he is still in the position to win. And the way he framed things in his ABC News interview was, look at my record. No one else could have beat Trump. No one else could have done this. He's just not leaving any room to be helpful to the vice president. And I really think the conversation.
And it's amusing that if the Democrats hadn't launched their lawfare campaigns against Donald Trump, there's a very good chance Donald Trump would not have been the 2024 Republican nominee. Right? Republicans had a wide open primary competition to be the nominee. There were debates, right? There was great media coverage and excitement who's going to be the Republican nominee. So Republicans created a system for a wide open competition to decide who was going to be their nominee for the 2024 presidential race. On the other hand, Democrats did the opposite. Right? They discouraged people from competing with Joe Biden. They didn't hold debates. They essentially rigged the process. And then now they're talking about, well, the voters have spoken. Right? The millions of people voted for Joe Biden. Yeah, you created a rigged situation. So this is why so much conversation about democracy just leaves me cold, because it's so irrelevant. It's just so removed from reality. It's just so much posturing and performance and so little truth. I mean, what happens in your body when you hear all this conversation about democracy itself is on the ballot? Now, there are within liberalism and Republicans, there are strands on the right that are anti-democracy, and just as there are strands on the left that are anti-democracy, right? So if you are right-wing, you have a skeptical view of human nature, and you want to have some bulwarks in place so that you don't have mob rule, right? You don't want demagogues rallying the masses to destroy a fragile social order. From a right-wing perspective, having social order is a fragile construct even in the best of times. So there are also specific American conservative fears about democracy, right? There's fear of the corrupt urban machine politics that dominates our big cities, right? Going back over 100 years. And so there are reasons that conservatives and Republicans have some skepticism about mass democracy, right? Republicans fear voter fraud, particularly in machine-run big cities that are Democrat operated. They fear non-citizens voting, and they fear that demographic change is increasingly delivering what may well be a permanent Democratic majority, right? Republicans are more likely to portray America as a republic, not a democracy. They defend our system's counter-majoritarian mechanisms, right? They defend the Electoral College instead of a popular vote for president. So yeah, there are anti-democratic strands in Republicans, just as there are with regard to Democrats. So Republicans often vote for referendums, such as to deny some social welfare benefits to illegal aliens, that then get overturned by the California Supreme Court in this case, right? 1996 referendum overwhelmingly passed by the citizens of California, but overturned by California's Supreme Court. And liberals like these unelected powers, bureaucrats and judges, right? Most federal workers, right, give donations to the Democrats by about a margin of something like 20-1, right? So federal government unions and federal government worker donations to American politics are overwhelmingly on the side of the Democratic Party. And the Democrats are appalled by the Supreme Court Chevron decision because it removes power from bureaucrats, right? Bureaucrats overwhelmingly align with the left. And so the Democrats like that these unelected, essentially unimpeachable, untouchable bureaucrats get to decide so much of our life. Now, on the other hand, you have the right deeply invested in the idea that it represents the true American majority, the moral, the silent majority, while liberalism stands for elite power, anti-democratic forms of government, the bureaucracy, the juristocracy, and the Ivy League. So it's a complicated backdrop, right? You have Donald Trump's stolen election narratives, and then you have all these stolen election narratives by Hillary Clinton and the Democratic Party for the 2016 and 2000 elections. So on both sides of the political spectrum, right, you have considerable skepticism of democracy, right? Nate Cohn, left-wing pollster established at the New York Times, he talks about undemocratic liberalism, right? That's pervasive in establishment politics throughout the Western world, right? So who votes is very different from who decides, right? So we have a steady trend in Western politics to reduce the realm of the political and instead turn over more and more of our decision-making to the experts. We try to remove religion from politics and race from politics and immigration from politics. And who should lead pandemic decision-making? Well, we must have the public health bureaucracies decide this. We can't have people playing politics with complex scientific matters. But who decides what your local school teaches your children? Well, you want the public school teachers and administrators and the universities' education schools making the decisions. You don't want parents getting some sort of veto power over courses and syllabi, right? Who decides the future of the European Union, right? It's the bureaucrats, not short-sighted voters, who should make important U.S. foreign policy decisions. Well, it should be the intelligence agencies. It should be the foreign policy establishment. You should be having decisions made by permanent regional specialists and military experts, not the mere whims of a president. So one of the, I think the first Trump impeachment, the Colonel Vindman made the point that it's the duty of Donald Trump to follow American foreign policy, right? It's not the president who gets to decide American foreign policy. The president of the United States should simply be a servant of the American foreign policy establishment. So populism believes in a united people, because only with a people united can a nation overcome elite rule. Elite rule, on the other hand, depends upon a divided country so that the elites can make alliances with various fragmented groups, such as the highly educated and those most in need of welfare. That's the current Democratic governing alliance. So there are all sorts of problems with democracy coming from the left and right. Right? People like democracy when it aligns with their hero system. They don't like democracy when it's against their hero system. Democrats rigged the 2024 primaries so that Joe Biden would just sail through essentially unopposed. And now they're trying to say, well, democracy itself is on the ballot, but many leading Democratic governors don't want to run in 2024 to replace Joe Biden because they think they'll have a better chance in 2028.
Should focus on the vice president. The rest of this clearly has been, I wouldn't say a strategic error because I didn't see much strategy behind it, but the idea of just replacing Biden with TBD popular candidate, I do think that has been helpful to Biden, making it look like a bunch of elites who don't know the party are trying to make something up. It's a version of what happened in 2019 where Mike Bloomberg and Tom Steyer decide they know it better than everybody and jump in the race. But what are you going to hear from congressional Democrats? It will be a mix. And so procedurally, not many members were in town last week. A lot of reporters were texting the same people. They were being cautious. They wanted to stay off the record. Who is willing to go in front of a camera today or face Manu Raju in the halls or the many Manu Rajus in the Capitol and say the same thing? I think what you're going to see is a mix of opinion. So I think some of the most damaging reporting of the previous week were people going back to sources who met Biden in Europe before the debate and were saying, well, in retrospect, he looked a little slippery. He looked like he lost it in this moment. I was worried about it in this moment. What is going to come out of that meeting? But nothing might be as...
So what are the most common arguments against the idea that Joe Biden's staff has been covering up a serious national security issue with Joe Biden's senility is, oh, Joe Biden's staff were just playing the hand that they were dealt. But couldn't you say that about anyone, right? Any monster? You could say that about Harvey Weinstein. He didn't choose to be fat and obnoxious and unattractive and unappealing, all right? He just played the hand he was dealt. And we have Peter Baker, right, told New York Times columnist Maureen Dowd, he started using translation headsets on overseas trips because even when he's 20 feet away from the president, these translation headsets offer a magnified volume when Joe Biden starts to mumble. Right? It's increasingly difficult to figure out what the hell Joe Biden is talking about. On the other hand, I want to play a challenge to this perspective because Joe Biden did present a relatively lucid, long interview with Howard Stern just 10 weeks ago.
Yeah,
so this is
but
Bill
what
Sherry.
other people have been making, and I think is valid, is that both of these campaigns are lying to us to a certain degree. I mean, Donald Trump has been lying about the election, the 2020 election, and now we have another campaign that's been basically Weekend at Bernie's. I mean, we don't know how long it's been going.
I mean, I do want to stop short of assuming that, because I think that's a jump, that there's an active cover-up, active deception going on. look, I posted this on X over the weekend. You can watch Joe Biden talk to Howard Stern for an hour, unscripted, 10 weeks ago. And his voice is stronger. His answers are more coherent and on point. I mean, he still seems older than 4 years ago.
Okay, this is an excellent rejoinder.
But it's pretty night and day from the debate and from Stephanopoulos.
By the way, Bill, an interesting point about that. Your boy David Pakman at the time said that he thought that the White House may have given Stern some questions, and Stern pushed back heavily on that.
Yes.
And, you remember this?
I do remember. And Pakman was a little apologetic. He didn't want to besmirch, because Stern's a big David Pakman fan.
And Stern had said good things about David Pakman, which I think David Pakman.
Right, and now we know that the Biden team did give questions to 2 radio stations that recently interviewed Joe Biden. So the possibility that Howard Stern was given questions, or that Howard Stern gave over the points that he wanted to discuss to Joe Biden's team, increasingly seems more probable, no matter how much Howard Stern denies it. Right? Is Howard Stern really a man of just unimpeachable integrity? All right, Mark Halperin has switched. I want to be honest. Friday, he thought that Joe Biden was going to drop out. Now he believes that Joe Biden is going to stay.
Very reminiscent, as I've written.
Oh, no. What the heck? I just removed the video. Oh, come on, guys. I'm trying to run a professional show here. Bloody hell.
Crisis brought to everybody the breakdown of President Biden's interview. There was a moment that I played for everybody over the weekend, but we all need to ruminate and to discuss, which was the final one, which displayed Joe Biden's real arrogance after his disastrous debate performance. George Stephanopoulos asked, how are you going to feel, if you continue to stay in this race and Donald Trump beats you in the election? He basically said, well, it's all about me, and that's the only thing that matters. Here's what he had to say.
Mr. President, I've never seen a president at 36% approval get reelected.
Well, I don't believe that's my approval rate. That's not what our polls show.
And if you stay in and Trump is elected and everything you're warning about comes to pass, how will you feel in January?
I feel as long as I gave it my all and I did the goodest job as I know I can.
I did the goodest job that I know I could do, then it's just fine. All right, I don't know if Mark Halperin edited this video, but he's got a replacement video up.
Distraught back to being a warrior. The people around Joe Biden are warriors, and some of the people who are warriors are the very same people who 72 hours ago told me they didn't see a path to survival. Now they do. I think right now, if there's no new data, if there's no new incidents, if the polling data, which is not good, which we'll get.
Of course, there are going to be more incidents.
Get to. Doesn't cause a giant outbreak. I think he's home free. I think what we're talking about now is not what we've been talking about since the debate. Will he make it or not? What we're talking
Joe Biden is home free. Yeah, the health and survival and well-being of the republic is at risk, but at least Joe Biden is home free.
About now is what are the implications of what he's gone through for his chances of winning a general election? Barring, again, some new incident. And the reason I say that is because the Democratic Party is divided. They're divided about whether he should go or not. And on his side is every senior elected official in Pennsylvania who spent the day with him yesterday, the Congressional Black Caucus, a lot of governors, a lot of Democrats in Congress. He has all the delegates. They're his. And he's not inclined to give them up. I think people underestimated his attitude. That remains what it's been from the beginning. Kamala Harris cannot be Donald Trump and would be a bad president. None of these other people who were talked about could be Donald Trump, especially from a standing start.
Okay, and so why, if she's so bad, such a lousy politician, is she vice president? Because Democrats are a victim of their own identity politics. Right? They didn't put her on the vice presidency because of her excellence, or they didn't select the press secretary for Joe Biden because of her excellence, but rather they just wanted to play identity politics.
And he intends to win. Now, again, in the interview this morning on Morning Joe, in his interview with George Stephanopoulos, he's not speaking the truth about where he stands in the polls. That's pretty common for politicians. That's not something extraordinary. No politician is going to say, I'm way behind, I can't possibly win. But unless there was a way for Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries and Nancy Pelosi to go to him and say, you need to go, it's not going to happen. And my sources say they're not going to do that. They haven't come out in support of him yet, but I think it could happen as soon as today. I think it will almost certainly happen by the end of the week. There's some people who want to wait for the press conference, but they may not get a chance to wait because of the president's letter today and his appearance on Morning Joe. He's trying to shut it down this week.
All right, Gail Collins is in charge of the New York Times editorial page, and her perspective I've always found absurd. And she says if Joe Biden steps down, I don't see how the Democratic Party can ignore the first female vice president who is also black and the daughter of immigrant parents, and who, as vice president, is already the most logical Biden successor. So the job of the Democratic nominee to be president of the United States should go to someone because they are black and female, the first female vice president, and the daughter of immigrant parents, right? That's why she should be put forward. So yes, if the Democrats' goal is to stay true to their brand of identity politics, then Kamala Harris is the clear choice. But if the primary goal for the Democrats is what they say, keeping the White House, then Kamala Harris is probably about the worst choice. And she's wildly unpopular. She's only won one competitive election. She's associated with the immigration issue, which Americans see as the Biden administration's single greatest policy fiasco. This is Bret Stephens here in conversation with Gail Collins. She ran a dreadful primary campaign in 2020. She has no appeal with swing voters, and there's a Hillary Clinton vibe to her, and we know how that worked out in 2016. And Gail Collins says, your Hillary Clinton vibe, right? That sounds like a no women allowed rule. What an absurd argument. And Brett says he'd be happy to see Gretchen Whitmer or Gina Raimondo, right? My point was about electability, not gender. And Gail Collins claims, oh, Kamala Harris has done her job well as vice president. She's become a far better campaigner. And the idea that the child of immigrants is the wrong one to tackle the immigration issue is un-American? Really? Does competence have nothing to do with it? What has Kamala Harris ever done or ever said that makes you think that she has expertise with regarding to solving America's rampant immigration problems? And the Democrats are terrified about a Trump presidency just seems absurd to me. And Gail Collins says, I don't think Donald Trump cares about immigration. Well, Donald Trump has been caring and talking publicly about the problems with massive immigration for 40 years in public life, along with problems with our trade policy, right? So these are some of the things that he truly does believe in. All right, back to Mark Halperin.
And they've made it clear, his people have made it clear, they're taking names. They know the names of everybody who's come out against him. And so now if you come out against him and you don't have any indication that he's going to step down, you're just hurting his chance of winning a general election. And they've made that clear to people over the weekend and today. The reality is there's not a lot of confidence he's going to win the general election amongst senior Democratic congressional officials. There wasn't confidence before the debate. There's less confidence now. But they're also not big believers in Kamala Harris stepping in and doing this. The divisions amongst those who'd like the president to go about whether Kamala Harris should be the nominee or should there be an open convention has not helped their cause. There's no unified alternate plan. There are a lot of fantasy plans about how to do an open convention. There's a lot of fantasies about different possibilities. There's some support, but far from universal support for Vice President Harris. And so in the absence of a clear alternative that they could take to Joe Biden or that they could take to the public, he's surviving. And he's surviving using a lot of the Trump.
So Joe Biden isn't handling the pressure well. The press secretary for Joe Biden isn't handling the pressure well. We know that Kamala Harris has a long track record of not handling pressure well. Gretchen Whitmer doesn't handle it well.
Calling for your husband to drop out of the race. How are you feeling about the state of the race? All right, ladies.
We're dealing with a dysfunctional family that's always put themselves above the country.
All right, let's get more analysis from Mark Halperin.
Going against elites, big money donors, the media, Hollywood, although he's not calling them Hollywood, but just going against elites like Trump and going against the media. And he's surviving like Clinton, the base of the party, Union, Congressional Black Caucus. If those two groups are with you in the Democratic Party, very hard to topple someone, particularly someone who possesses all the delegates. As I said, my focus is now turning to what damage has this done. We're not going to get a clean test of that if the Republicans perform well in selecting and unveiling a running mate and holding their convention. Because those two things, if done well, should give Trump some sort of boost, right? The academic and professional data suggests if you have a good running mate selection and a good convention, you should see some sort of bump. Now, Trump is at or near his ceiling, which is higher than we presumed it was previously. But it's hard to see Trump doing much better. But if you look at the public, what little public polling there is, go ahead and put up the Emerson poll. If you look at what little public polling there is, and if you look at what I've seen in terms of private Democratic and Republican data, it appears that Bloomberg poll might be an outlier. This is an Emerson poll done for an interest group. Democrats are savaging it and saying it's not a legit poll, even though it's done by Emerson. These numbers here roughly match what I believe is the case in private Democratic data, including private Democratic data that Barack Obama sees, where Trump is ahead everywhere. His Michigan number is different. It's closer in Michigan in this poll. But those numbers roughly match what I've seen elsewhere. If anything, they're a little bit worse for Trump than what I've seen in almost every case, with the exception of Pennsylvania. You can take that down. Whether that poll's true or not, whether that's a good poll or not, again, I think you're going to find this week, if there are polls after the convention, I think you're going to find that Trump has leads in every battleground state, or he's tied in every battleground state, but that there's no obvious path for Biden to win. And so what's the damage? Well, the damage is lots of quotes out there from Democrats saying guy shouldn't be the nominee. There's all this discussion about whether he should be president now. There's lots of ads coming about how he wants to go to sleep early and can't be trusted to deal with crises at 3 o'clock. I share David Axelrod's analysis. A Trump landslide right now is more likely than a Biden win. It doesn't mean Biden can't win, but there's no obvious path to Biden winning right now.
Yeah, right now, a Trump landslide is far more likely than a Joe Biden win.
Either in terms of the Electoral College or how he comes back. What are the events that occur absent or besides a great Democratic convention? Besides that, what does he have? There could be a rate cut in the fall. I'm not sure how much of a difference that'll make. The immigration numbers are down, but I don't know that people are going to suddenly say he solved the border crisis. There could be a Middle East deal. We'll see. There are things that could on the margins help him, but the general reality of a guy about whom people have serious doubts that he's up to being president now or for 4 more years, who's deeply unpopular in terms of his record and his policies, is currently losing to Donald Trump, another deeply unpopular person. But he is losing currently, as he was before the debate. Last couple of things I want to say. There's a lot of focus still on those who haven't given up on getting him out of the race, about who could get the family to change their mind. Chris Dodd is a name that comes up a lot. There's a few others. But I'll tell you, most of the people I'm talking to around it now say it's not an open discussion. And what's happened with the Black Caucus, with the Pennsylvania politicians, with setting out a schedule, has fired him up to the point where he now feels good to have some new talking points to attack the press, to attack the donors. If you look at the public opinion polling, he's not right about what people think about his capacities. He's not right about that. But he is right that he's currently not being blown out to the point where there isn't some sort of path back, at least in theory. I would say, again, that we went from looking very imperiled to being now, I think, very safe for the nomination. So perhaps there's people on here who can describe a route to coming back. I'd love to hear it. If somebody has one, please raise your hand and talk about the Biden comeback. All right, hands going up. I want to start with John Podhoretz, who yesterday said Biden was safe before today's developments. And John, I'd love to know if you...
Hunter's sentencing is coming up. Hunter's second trial is coming up. The stress that must be putting on him is unimaginable in some ways. But he could sit there and say, Trump could get hit by a truck, or, something really awful could happen with Trump, and, he could kill Melania. I mean, whatever you could say. You could say, okay, this is where we are. We're going ahead with it. As Paul Newman says in the verdict, I said, to hell with it, to hell with it. We're going ahead with the trial. And what he's done in the last 24 hours is say, okay, take me out. Go ahead. Just try. Give it a shot. And clearly there is no way to take him out. So he's going to be going ahead. And God save America.
Yeah.
From
I
him
will
and
say,
from Trump.
Yep. I will say, thank you, John. I will say that trying to invoke the 25th Amendment against someone supported by the Congressional Black Caucus, to me, is an absolute non-starter. I didn't think it was likely before, but I can't imagine.
Right. If you have the support of the Congressional Black Caucus, then you have the support of holy people whose support cannot be challenged or questioned. Right? You get the support of the low information voter, and that is somehow holy.
Imagine the Democratic politicians who would think that would be a good idea. Jill Abramson, unmute, please.
Hi, everyone.
So Jill Abramson's the former editor of the New York Times.
I mean, I think, and this is such a Hail Mary and improbable, but the one prayer for Joe Biden is an unforeseen outrage or event involving Trump, which somehow in the last weeks of the election makes the narrative and the election focus on Trump. I've thought...
Right, as long as the focus is on Joe Biden, right, that's good for Donald Trump. As long as the focus is on Donald Trump, that's good for Joe Biden.
That if the election is about Donald Trump, Biden stands a chance. Given, that he's already a convicted felon, I don't know what it would take to put, enough of a negative focus on Trump to do that. But I think that's the only prayer. And I think it's a faint prayer, but it's a prayer.
And Jill, short of some Comey-like intervention, you consider Biden's chances to be less than 12%?
Biden's strategy to make the race about Trump is suddenly in doubt. This article is by Reed J. Epstein and read by an automated voice. From the outset of President Biden's re-election campaign, the plan for winning was to make former President Donald J. Trump so unpalatable that voters uneasy with the incumbent would vote for him anyway. But now Mr. Biden is stuck in a political tailspin, with an abysmal debate performance highlighting his inability to make a case against Mr. Trump and prompting a collective national hand-wringing about his ability to do his job, while an increasing number of House Democrats say he should leave the race. To get voters to focus on the threats posed by a second Trump administration, Mr. Biden's own allies say he first must escape his current doom loop and convince voters, even and especially fellow Democrats, that he is up to the job himself. The focus has to shift back to Trump and what rights we lose if he's president, said Representative Eric Swalwell of California, who ran against Mr. Biden for the 2020 Democratic presidential nomination.
Okay, so those rights, all right, such as the right for a woman to have an abortion, all right, that takes away rights from everyone else. It takes away rights from the father of the baby. It takes away rights from the community that may decide that it has a certain conception of life and doesn't want this going on. All right, so when you expand rights for one group, you're also taking them away for another group.
The last 3 elections have shown us if you're the focus, you lose. Indeed, the Biden campaign has long sought to make Mr. Trump its focus. That's why Mr. Biden kicked off this year with a blistering speech about Mr. Trump's attempt to overthrow the last election, why his allies spent millions to block the No Labels effort.
Okay, here is a key paragraph from this story. Even Mr. Biden's most stalwart supporters say Democrats will lose the election if it remains a referendum on Mr. Biden's ability to serve. Right, that is a loser. Democrats cannot win in that circumstance.
The people who've had to defend Biden and kind of look the other way, be they electeds or just voters, or especially the media and others, would this new position that you've said is probably 95% in there, that they're just going to ride with Biden. But now they've got to continue to prop him up like they did over the last year and a half. So that's, to me, it seems like a tough position for them to go back to. But then I got your email an hour and a half ago, and I happened to turn on the TV right around the same time, and I saw the press conference with KJP answering questions from some really pissed off reporters. I thought that's what you were saying, a day like no other. They were going after her hard on who are these neurologists, who are these Parkinson's specialists that are going into the White House. And I think they've now come back and said, hey, we played the fool long enough. We need to now actually do our jobs. And I think they're going to double down. I think they're pissed off. And I think that's more of a story. She said, I can't give out the name of the physician that's done these neurological tests on the president because of privacy, but she's saying it's because of the patients that the doctor might.
Gary, thank you. You're actually cutting out a little bit. I've had several requests to do an entire two-way about the media and President Biden and this issue, and we probably will eventually. I will say what I've written, which is, how could they not have diagnosed him? If you had a family member who was exhibiting the symptoms he's exhibited for almost a decade, you'd have him checked out. If you had the access to the healthcare that he does, you'd do every test, and you'd want a diagnosis, and you'd search for treatment. They sort of have said, no, we didn't do that. That his cognitive test is his job. If I had a relative who had his symptoms, I'd have him take the cognitive test. Again, they said he hasn't been diagnosed. I continue to be skeptical about that. It's a job for a reporter to be skeptical. And I think part of when you're assessing the damage that's been done to him, even though he stays in the race, the press is more hostile. We're starting to see Trump stories again, but we're still seeing way more Biden stories. And there are obviously more to come. And the conspiracy amongst those who guarded his schedule and protected him from exposure, probably those people aren't going to break, but somebody could. And that would obviously present a huge problem for them, and a huge credibility problem for them. And it's an interesting question. If he decides he's safe, and I think they're feeling pretty good after today. He did not just Morning Joe, but they did a call with the big donors. They're doing a call apparently with the Congressional Black Caucus that he's going to be on. He's going to do his press conference on Thursday, but does he now feel compelled to go out and do what the people said he had to do, the Democrats said he had to do, more interviews, more press conferences, more town halls, the kinds of things that he hasn't done for a reason now that he's home free? Don't know the answer to that, but they have, as you, Gary, correctly pointed out, they have a very hostile press corps, and he's not good with hostile. Jill Biden got some very aggressive questioning today on the road, and she reacted.
Right. Most people are not good getting hostile reactions from other people. Most people tend to wilt under that. Right. We tend to make ourselves smaller and tighter and compress ourselves to try to reduce the vulnerability that we feel when we're under hostile attack, and then we don't operate nearly as effectively. All right, the voice gets weakened. Right, our thinking becomes compressed, our emotions become compressed. All right, we become much more vulnerable to breaking down when we get smaller and tighter and get all these weird compression patterns.
In kind of, I haven't seen the video, but just reading the full report, she reacted in kind of an affronted way. They're not used to this. And it's a...
Right. Normally, they expect that the press is in their court. Right. They expect that the press will protect them and serve them. And now they're getting a very rude awakening.
It's true in my career covering presidentials. When the Republican presidential candidate gets better treatment, softer treatment, more favorable treatment than the Democrat, they win every time. And when they don't, they lose every time. And he's in danger, amazingly, given who the Republican nominee is and the media's posture towards him, he's in danger of losing the support of the media because of what's happened. Thank you, Gary. Hank Morris. Please, Hank. Hank has worked on many congressional races.
The candidate with the
best
relations with the
answering your
press
question
wins.
from before about what could happen. I don't believe
Yes.
what I'm about to say, but this could happen, which is you have buyer's remorse the last 3 weeks of the election, similar to what might have just happened in France. If there's also a sense that Trump is going to win, you might have depressed turnout on the Trump side. So that's all in the category of wishful thinking. In terms of one thing that happened today that hasn't become a bigger deal yet, although I think it's about to, is the president either lied this morning or misspoke on Morning Joe when he said that all his medical records in full had been released. And that apparently is just not true.
It's not.
There used to be a saying that the difference between Democrats and cannibals was that cannibals don't eat their own. I think that is really the truth about Republicans these days. In terms of what could shift President Biden leaving the race, I am curious what everyone's thoughts are on this, but potentially if the prosecutor in Hunter Biden's tax case has a change of heart and decides to tack on FARA violations, could that shift?
Right. At a certain point, Joe Biden is going to have a breaking point.
It's hard for me to believe that Biden does not have a breaking point. Because as I listen to your analysis, I'm looking at him right now as a civilized Donald Trump. One Democrat in the country that was unable to beat Donald Trump, it was Joe Biden. Because of his age, not because of his age, because of his feebleness, because of the presentation that you see, and of course the debate. All of us, when we watched the debate, that first sentence, we said, "Holy cow, this can't be."
Harvey, would you rather he step aside?
Oh, I'd absolutely rather he step aside.
And while he is rigid, I note that Dr. O'Connor, his physician.
Right, this is a physician to Richard Nixon who is 95 years of age, but still mentally sharp.
Physician, and I was in the Army, and you have your duty to your patient, states that he has spinal arthritis, which might be contributing to his rigidity. So the fact of the matter is, we do not know whether he has Parkinson's. It's not unreasonable for him to have a neurological specialist examine him, and that does not give us any diagnosis. The fact of the matter is, we do not have a diagnosis. We have other things to be concerned about. He had cerebral problems with his arteries being ligated at one point in 1988.
Fox News alert, a major medical scandal rocking the Biden White House. The president's condition is worse than we thought, and so's the cover-up. Visitor logs reveal Joe's personal doctor has been having regular meetings with a top Parkinson's expert. These meetings have happened at the White House. This Parkinson's specialist may have been examining President Biden, but we don't know because they won't tell us. Dr. Kevin Kennard, a movement disorder specialist at Walter Reed, who also happens to be a Biden donor, has been to the White House 8 times in the last year. Even though the visits are public record, the White House won't admit they happened.
Could you state, very clearly, yes or no, was that expert here to participate in anything surrounding the care of the President of the United States?
So let me just say a couple of things. We have had a comprehensive, and I just want to take another step back, comprehensive physical examination. The president has had that. We've given a comprehensive report. We've shared that the past 3 years. Every year that he has had this exam, he sees a neurologist.
And I'm asking you a very basic, direct question.
Wait. Hold on. Wait a second.
Eight times, or at least once, in regards to the president specifically.
Hold on a second.
Not what you should be able to answer by this point.
Wait, no. No, wait a minute. Ed, please. We have to keep their privacy.
It is public information.
I hear you. Guys, has the president been treated for Parkinson's? No. Is he being treated for Parkinson's? No, he's not. Is he taking medication for Parkinson's? No.
If cancer doctors are regularly visiting the White House to meet with the White House physician, it's legitimate to wonder if the president has cancer. But most cancer doesn't affect the brain. And the American people deserve to know if the commander-in-chief's faculties are fully functioning. He works for us, remember? We pay his salary. If my employee had a debilitating disease that was affecting his or her work, that's my business. Walter Reed's run by the military. You don't think the intelligence agencies know their top Parkinson's doc making house calls to the president? And while all of this is going on, House Republicans are looking into Joe's doctor's ties to a shady Biden family business deal. Chairman of the House Oversight Committee, James Comer, joins me now. Congressman, tell me a little bit about the White House doctor's involvement with the Biden family business.
Well, we know that Dr. O'Connor was involved in a shady scheme that dealt with the failing healthcare company Americor Health. This was a deal with Jim Biden. We know this.
Okay, let's get more analysis here from Mark Halperin. He talks to two doctors with two different perspectives on Joe Biden.
And so the question is, we have a situation where one candidate has a serious mental health problem, perhaps, and another candidate has physical health problems. And is this healthy or unhealthy aging? Thank you.
All right, Ray, stay on with us. I want to bring in another doctor. Remind everybody the purpose of two-way civil conversation. The other doctor happens to be Nan Hayworth, former Republican Congresswoman, a supporter of President Trump. And I think you two, I'd love to hear you two discuss what you think is going on with President Biden, knowing that neither of you has examined him. And I think Nan has a thesis. I'd love for you to share it. And Ray, I'd love for you to react to it. Nan, are you able to come on camera or at least come unmute yourself?
Who far outranks me in seniority. I have thought that, and we all create a differential diagnosis, and at the top of my differential diagnosis list for President Biden is, and this is in no way, obviously, I have not made a diagnosis, I haven't examined him, but would be Lewy body dementia. It can be slowly progressive. It has Parkinsonian features, but the primary presentation is in terms of mental and cognitive decline. And it can have diverse manifestations. It is in some ways a diagnosis of exclusion, although modern imaging techniques can confirm it, particularly things like PET scanning of various sorts. And the reason I say that is because I think it's been clear for several years now that President Biden has been diminished in his performative capabilities, certainly. There is a rigidity and a slow, what we call bradykinesis, a slowing of his movements. His face does tend to become frozen. His blink frequency is decreased. And by the way, I'm not a neurologist, I'm a board certified ophthalmologist. And I do feel that that's at the top of, as I say, a differential diagnosis list, which includes other things, including a whole range of dementias. The other thing I'd like to mention, and Dr. Skalatar did point this out, President Biden has had two intracranial procedures for aneurysms, 1988 and 1990. And I'll stop in just a moment, but the post-operative course of those patients, and I'm talking about over years, has been studied by a friend and colleague of mine who's a well-respected neurosurgeon, Dr. Thomas Lanson. And he noted to me a few months back that in every one of those patients, and he was very surprised by this, patients whose operations were successful. I mean, Joe Biden showed no sequelae for many, many years, if his current state is related to those operations at all. But he found distinct, measurable cognitive deficits in every one of those patients, much to his surprise. And since it's such a significant procedure and a lot of brain tissue is touched and handled, even under the best of circumstances, that may be contributing to this. It may be the entire explanation in some form.
Big reveal now, because we always want to point out here that this is not about President Biden's age, it's about his cognitive abilities. Here's the big reveal. Ray, tell everybody how young you are.
I'm 95.
Okay. Doctor who treats the president of the United States. Is it equal to the patient in the public interest, or is it just the patient? Ray, you've been in a position like this working for President Nixon. Senators Mark Warner, who, as everybody here knows, has been behind the scenes trying to bring a group of senators together to discuss the path forward. His tweet is a little mealy-mouthed. I won't read the whole thing, but he says, "As these conversations continue, I believe it is incumbent upon the president to more aggressively make his case to the American people and to hear directly from a broader group of voices about how to best prevent Trump's lawlessness from returning to the White House." So that is hardly throwing the gauntlet down, and that's the position of lots of senators, including some who have been more supportive of the president. Ed Goaz, who's elected a lot of Republicans and worked for a lot of people who might have had mental health issues. Ed, go ahead.
What would you like to hear? There in Biden, and I'm one of those that feels like he is not nearly as bad as what he thinks. Now, I have a different feeling about it, and as you know, I talked to Celinda Lake, who is part of the Biden team, and my advice to her, I grew up with a speech impediment. I know what it's like when you start getting nervous about everything coming out right, and that is as much what I think I'm seeing in Biden with his freezing as some type of cognitive problem. It is a problem of he's very nervous over his speech impediment and being able to communicate more directly, coming back and kind of haunting him. My advice to Celinda is, number one, what I've seen with the handlers of Biden, they're way over abusing him in terms of training, in terms of practicing, in terms of time being put in on that. That only makes that situation worse. Second is I've advised them to bring in some speech therapists who understand freezing, who understands what happens when
condition or disease. But you can see the scars of a facelift, and he has had a facelift. And I don't disparage that. It's what I do all the time. And most facelift patients are just normal people who want to look better. I'm in a young industry. I need to look good. I want to feel good about myself. You know, all these stereotypes about them being vain and bad are completely false. But like Carter was the first president born in a hospital, he is the first president who has had a facelift. And he's also the oldest president. And that's not a pure coincidence. He has long, probably since early VP days or just before, that's when he had the facelift. And so he's looked younger than his chronological age. And it sort of begs the question of, I don't think that he should have to disclose it. And I wouldn't do an interview today. I'm always asked to do interviews with so-and-so had a facelift. I would never do it. And I don't do those about celebrities. And I wouldn't do it about a politician. So this is actually being done in hindsight. We already know he's had the facelift. We already know he has intellectual issues. And so for at least 4, 8, or 12 years, he's been looking younger than he really is. And this is almost not a subject of where he is now, but how we would have perceived him differently in the past. And, you know, is he, I would say, an expensive fake? And I joke because we talk about cheap fakes and deep fakes. A facelift is expensive. He is an expensive fake. He looks younger because a facelift is effective than he really is. And
Steve, let me just ask you, how do you know when he had it? Because you noticed the change?
I know when he had it in retrospect, looking at pictures when he was a senator early, you know, he for sure had it through all of his presidency, certainly through later second term vice president years. But it's hard to find dated pictures that show a profile. It's really the profile view where you see it, where the scar comes from the top of the ear, around this little thing called the tragus, around the lobe, up the back. Now, you never see this scar, but in a lot of pictures, you see the scar in front of the ear and underneath the ear. And for what I see, the scar is a little thick and wide down here along the earlobe. It's paler than the surrounding tissue because it has less pigment. A man usually has a gap between where the beard ends, where the sideburn ends, and where the ear is. But when you pull back on the facelift, the beard then abuts the ear. You can see where he was pulled behind the neck, particularly when he leans forward. It looks tight in here. So that's how I know he had it.
Okay. So Steve, let me ask you, if you have the procedure he had, does that last or does that require maintenance?
You will always look younger for having done it, but gravity resumes in the recovery room. So people who, he looks better today than his identical twin who didn't have it done. You are never required to have it done. But for those who always want to look their best and start this process in their early 50s, they may repeat it every 7 to 12 years.
And is Botox a way to maintain it, or is that a different thing?
Botox doesn't do what a facelift does. It temporarily paralyzes muscles. And when you paralyze the muscle that raises the brow or that makes you smile, you therefore reduce the crow's feet and the horizontal lines on the forehead. And I think
maybe all the Botox is part of the reason that his face doesn't seem to move
probably
much.
has had some Botox as well.
Yeah. All right. Interesting.
Okay.
Devastating as the debate itself. And so part of what they're betting on here is just the normal half-life of people's opinion of a bad event. As people get further from the debate, what are they watching? The other part of this is that the Trump campaign is not taking advantage. If it did, I think that, I don't know what the impact would be, but the Trump campaign put out a couple of video ads. Trump himself has put out true social statements and not said anything. You don't have Republicans previewing how they're going to blitz Biden with the video of him looking lost. We have it from their ads, but they've very smartly taken themselves out of the conversation because they think the best scenario here is a weakened Joe Biden running with the nomination and losing. The debate is Kamala beatable, et cetera, et cetera.
All right, Sean Hannity often talked about Joe Biden's cognitive decline, as did the right-wing media in general.
Which is something we have been reporting and been criticized for more than 4 years before the 2020 election. Take a look to remind you. We turn once again to the ever weak, frail, cognitive mess that is all things Joey Biden and Sippy Cup. He's so obviously having cognitive issues. That's being polite. After all, he's having more and more trouble recalling basic facts, what day of the week it is, what office he's running for. They are obviously hiding something about Joe Biden. In all likelihood, they are hiding the full extent of Joe's cognitive struggles, because when he does go out 2-3 days in a row, it's an unmitigated disaster. In spite of the feigned outrage and shock and horror at the debate, everyone that works in state-run media, the mob as I call them, they have known beyond any doubt that Joe Biden is mentally impaired. For 3 years, he barely did any press conferences or other unscripted events. He did very few sit-down interviews. They were few and far between. He struggled to walk with an unusual shuffle, barely getting his feet off the ground. We saw him fall over and over and over again. Then the big boy steps up to Air Force One. They were soon replaced with the little boy staircase. Also, Joe took almost every weekend off. And when he was at the White House, his calendar featured barely one public event on average per day. Those events were always very short, tightly controlled, and still Joe struggled. The majority of Americans, as much as 70%, have long believed that Biden is not fit to serve. It has been obvious Joe was never up to the job, but the media mob did their best to cover this up and lie for him for years. They even tried to gaslight any American into thinking very real videos showing Biden's struggles, they were cheap fake videos. Again, those very real videos were unedited. And this was only a couple of weeks ago. They attacked the special counsel, Robert Hur, because he dared to refer to Biden as an elderly man with a poor memory who was asking questions like, was I still vice president in 2009? And now Joe Biden's weaponized Department of Justice is refusing to let you see the Hur interview and decide for yourself. Well, that is the DOJ's campaign contribution to Joe and a cover-up of monumental and historic proportions. This is bad for our country. Meanwhile, I was attacked repeatedly, called a conspiracy theorist for pointing out the obvious, the transparent truth about Joe Biden's cognitive state. They have been lying and...
Right. The conservative media has consistently said that Joe Biden is senile for about 4 years. So Joe Biden calls into the Morning Joe TV show today, and you can hear him rustling the pages that he's reading from in the background. All right, this is
up with the president now trying to save himself with an interview with George Stephanopoulos, a pair of interviews with two black radio hosts in Pennsylvania, one of whom has now been fired, both of whom have now admitted that they just asked the questions the White House provided them.
And we have reason to believe that Howard Stern had prepared questions for Joe Biden when he did his interview 10 weeks ago.
And frankly, I can tell you right here from this seat, the same is true of Morning Joe. Guaranteed. It was rehearsed. It was understood between them exactly where they'd go with this interview. And the choreography of the whole thing was set between the sitting president and his BFFs posing as some sort of journalistic figures over at MSNBC this morning. Stu, what do you make of it?
Fascinating stuff. I mean, this has been one of the most incredible week or two periods that I can ever remember in politics. I mean, the debate performance was one of the most...
Right. If the media is willing to essentially lie and cover up for Joe Biden for years over his dramatic cognitive decline, I mean, what else are they lying and covering up?
Catastrophic things I've ever seen occur in politics for a candidate. And now this fallout, which has been amazing. Everything from the media completely changing and morphing into like this group of people that actually like hold, a president on the Democratic side to account. All of a sudden, they're doing their scattered showers of journalism all over the place, which has been fascinating to watch. And of course, the Morning Joe thing is just hilarious. Just a couple of months ago, Joe Scarborough was on the air saying, this guy is not only cogent, but he's the best he's ever been. He was saying that it was a conspiracy theory, that they kept underestimating him at their own peril. Then it seemed for a couple of days, I guess, that he was supposed to be, this is...
But by the way, now Democrats, the media, they're trying to humiliate Biden, force him out of this race. And that's why we're seeing bombshell reports like this one from ABC, quote, Parkinson's expert visited White House 8 times in 8 months, met with Biden's doctor. And this story from Axios detailing the tremendous effort needed just to get Joe on a stage. Not only do staffers help guide the president in person, but apparently they also print out big pictures for Joe showing him the exact path to get to the podium and the stage, given simple step-by-step instructions in huge font, like walk to podium. Actually says that. But anyway, we continue. One staffer working at a fundraiser told Axios, quote, it surprised me that a seasoned political pro like the president would need detailed verbal and visual instructions on how to enter and exit a room. But it gets worse. This week, our suspicions were confirmed. It appears the White House, the Biden campaign, is in the habit of feeding pre-approved questions to so-called journalists ahead of their interviews. At least 2 radio hosts now have come forward admitting the...
All right, let's get back to the analysis on Megyn Kelly.
It was really bad performance, and maybe he should be thinking about his legacy. And then today he seems to be back on the bandwagon. I mean, the man seems to have absolutely no beliefs that are actually real other than what will get him more conversations at a cocktail party. He seems to have no soul. The way that because there's this thing that happens when normal humans communicate with each other, Megan, which is when you're saying something that you know to be a blatant lie, you feel this internal level of shame. You feel uncomfortable doing it. Most people feel this. Joe Scarborough has mastered the skill to not feel any shame whatsoever when he says blatantly untrue things that disagree with each other moments apart. It is a parlor trick I didn't know anyone had, but in reality, it's disgusting. And
no, so we have this put together, Stu. So Joe Scarborough, this morning in his interview with the president, if you hear the questions, he goes on like, the elites, the politicians, the press, you know, they're calling for you to step out of this race. You know, these people who think they know better. You're one of them, you dishonest dumbass. To your point, Stu, listen, we put together his, just this past couple of weeks, evolution and back, Scarborough's, on Joe Biden. All right, here he is. You'll hear the SOT montage where initially he's talking about how Joe Biden's the greatest ever, best he's ever been. And then after the debate, how he sounded. And then a few days went by and he reversed messaging again. And now he's out there pretending he wasn't one of the ones calling for Biden to step down. Listen.
He's far beyond cogent. In fact, I think he's better than he's ever been.
He spent much of the night with his mouth agape and his eyes darting back and forth. I fear Donald Trump will be the next president of the United States unless things change, and tragically did not rise to the occasion. And now is a good time. In June, thank God, in June, and not October, in June, this is the last chance for Democrats to decide whether this man we've known and loved for a very long time is up to the task. Let's take a deep breath, and let's understand it's only July the 5th. Such an historic decision should not be made in haste.
It's unbelievable, Stu, right? Thank God we know in June. Hey, you know what? Actually, it's only July. Like, don't make the decision in haste. Anything could happen. He could turn this whole thing around.
I really do think it's incredible. And if we should all remember here, too, that when it felt like the right thing to do to be buddies with Donald Trump, that's also what he was. He was bringing him on television.
Licked them
licked the
openly
boots on
every
a daily
morning.
basis. Yeah. Brought him on. They went to each other's weddings and like hung out and were buddies to the extent that even off the air, leaked video show that he was basically asking Donald Trump what questions he wanted to be asked. The same thing these poor reporters and radio hosts got fired for this weekend, he was doing to Donald Trump. And now he's completely reversed himself multiple times because whatever benefits Joe Scarborough on that day is what he says. That's who the guy is. He is one of the lowest forms in the entire media and has been his entire life.
So, Dave, as interesting as Scarborough's hypocrisy and lies are, the president's are far more interesting. And here he was sounding more vibrant this morning than he has over the past weekend and several years, trying to convince us that he is staying in this race and that really the focus should be on Trump's terrible performance at the debate. Sought to.
And I've not lost. I haven't lost. I beat him last time. I'll beat him this time. And this is a guy who, look, we talk about debates. Look at his performance at debates. He lied over, you know, Trump has 50 lies. I mean, look, this is a guy who says 10% of the universe. I don't want to get into it. He's just a liar. And he hasn't done a damn thing since the debate. He's been riding around in a golf cart for 10 days, down at Mar-a-Lago talking with his wealthy friend. I'm not running because of these guys, Joe. I'm running because, and you know me well enough to know this from the very beginning, I ran because I never bought on to the trickle-down economic theory. I never bought into the notion that we have to walk away from the rest of the world in the cave to Putin or anybody else. I've never believed any of that. And I'm confident that's where the American people are. So what I did was I went out and I wanted to make sure that there wasn't any slippage at all. And with the average voter, I don't care what the millionaires think.
Okay. So it's amazing, Dave, that he's calling attention to the fact that Trump's been silent for 10 days, which is the most disciplined Donald Trump has ever shown in his life. It's exactly the right move. He's trying to bait him into saying something so he can shift the story off of himself.
Yeah, no, Trump has played this very well, including the night of the debate. But listen, I'm so frustrated by all of this. And I talk to so many Americans who are so deeply frustrated because we are watching right now why nobody trusts politicians, why nobody trusts pundits. We all watched that debate. We know what we saw. It wasn't a close call. That was a senile man, at least on the edge of dementia, who is absolutely unfit to be the president of the United States. There is no question about that. Right. We all knew it. Our jaws were on the floor. But by the next morning, all of the politicians and all of the pundits were saying to themselves, all right, how do we spin this? How do we describe this? Because, well, you know, the Republicans, they don't think he's fit for office, but they'd rather run against him. And the Democrats, they don't mind the deep state running things, but now they're worried he might lose. And the American people are watching all of this and they're saying, you people don't give a shit about us. You don't give a shit about the country. You're worried about maintaining power. So let me try to break this cycle. Joe Biden is not fit to be president of the United States on July 8th, 2024. I don't care if it helps the Democrats, the Republicans, the Libertarians. He's not fit to be president, and everybody ought to just be able to say that. It's infuriating.
I totally agree with you on every word. It's infuriating that he gets to remain president between now and January, no matter what happens. You're right.
Right. The most of the conversation is about whether Joe Biden will win Wisconsin or Pennsylvania, when the primary discussion should be what is the national security threat to the United States.
Hey, everyone, I'm Megyn Kelly. Welcome to the sanctuary in the world. They've rescued thousands of dogs. Terry.
Yeah, it is. I think the
greatest ever, best he's ever been. And then after the debate, how he sounded. And then a few days went by and he reversed messaging again. And now he's out there pretending he wasn't one of the ones calling for Biden to step down. Listen.
He's far beyond cogent.
We already played that.
Even before Trump weighed in. And he just didn't have an answer. He didn't, because there is no answer. It wasn't Trump's yelling. It wasn't the mics. Again, in this interview, he said, I was exhausted. Last week, at the end of the week, he said it was my travel schedule. Jet lag, we've heard. Overprepared with details. He raised that again. None of that was the answer. And everyone knows it, Stu. I mean, that's the problem he's up against. He can say everything he wants here.
To our friend Elliott Blatt. Elliott, I thought an attractive lady was running a scam on you the last time we spoke. What's the latest?
Hold on a second. Let me get the
Let
me get the audio.
So just pull everything.
Question
together.
is, who's going to go along with it because they want the gaslighting to continue? Because
okay, I can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, yeah. All right. Well, we can talk about that later, but let's do a little Biden first.
Okay, great.
Okay. So, years ago, I talked to you about macro-biotics.
Okay.
And you may or may not have retained, but it's this sort of Japanese health system, right? It's a sort of way of looking at the world. And one of the sort of tenets is that sort of taller, thinner men, like Biden is. Biden's quite tall. I think he's 6'6" or something.
Yeah.
They tend to fall off pretty quickly when they start falling off. It has to do with blood circulation. Now, I put a comment in the chat about this, and I think he mocked it. And it is a bit off the wall. Yeah, you. Yeah, believe it or not, you. Which I admit that it's a out there theory, but so my expectation is that he is going to fall off. He's going to continue to fall off. And when the seasons change, that's often, these are very vulnerable periods for people in frail health.
Right.
Because there's a lot of adaptation that needs to take place, and they can't make the adaptation as swiftly as they used to be. So my expectation is come, late September, early October, he's going to have a lot of problems. A lot of problems, as Trump would say. So, I'm amazed that people are even postulating that he can continue. And Halperin seems to have made a turn on this matter.
Yes.
And do you agree with him, or it seems like
No, I still think he's going to drop out. I think his situation's incredibly dire. And I'm just thinking, this is a story that you've been on and given more priority than I have. I don't even remember what I said about Joe Biden and his senility, but you made the point repeatedly over the years that Joe Biden appears so checked out who's actually running the show, right? That's been an ongoing perspective.
Yeah, so this doesn't feel like a particularly brilliant insight of any kind. It just seemed to be sort of patently obvious. I mean, you've seen... He used to always have that sort of old man, confused, gravelly voice way back to 2020.
Yes.
And, people were making hay about this. And I guess it was just written off as partisan propaganda, but it just seemed to be manifestly true. And I'm amazed, and it sort of goes to a larger point about you, in a way, in that you seem to be sort of overcorrecting. So opinions that come from the right.
Yes,
right?
I'm harder on my own team because I really don't listen to much from the left. I really only listen to the right, and so kind of the de facto focus of this show is on stupidity and lies from the right.
Yeah, and I think I think that's sort of blinded you to, yes, there's a lot of crazy shit that comes from the right. There's no question about it. But, I make these jokes about going with the gut, but sometimes things are just obvious, Luke. They're just obvious. And you don't need peer-reviewed study to tell you that. You can use your own discernment, your own faculties to sort of discern the truth of the matter.
Yeah, and that's true. Absolutely. There are many times where going with your gut is more effective than looking for scientific studies. And this story is one example of that. Anyone just looking at Joe Biden and the very awkward way that he moved and spoke would just instinctively feel this guy is not all there. This guy is senile. That would be the natural human reaction to Joe Biden for 6 years now.
Yeah. I'm amazed at his tenacity. This would have been unthinkable when I was in high school. Like his remaining, you sort of remember the Reagan presidency, do you?
Yes.
And you remember like how, it was a different world back then. There wasn't Twitter. It's amazing that now, had there been Twitter, had there been internet back then, Reagan would have been a lot more scrutinized than any politician, including Biden, is today. And maybe Reagan wouldn't have survived as well as he has. But there was definitely a higher standard back then. And the idea that, Biden would, your reaction is that Biden is being selfish and jeopardizing the country would have been immediately understood by people of our generation. But I don't think that is as well understood by younger folk of today.
Yeah, I think we're probably more idealistic and more patriotic back in the 80s. Now we may be more assuming that, the system's rigged and there's not a lot we can do about it. And obviously the president's senile, and we've all been saying this for years, but it doesn't get any pull in elite circles.
No, right. And I had an interesting conversation. So I went, I had breakfast Saturday morning. Okay. Remember Joe from our previous story?
Yes.
Yeah. I've been sort of boxing him out of my life for the past couple of weeks because it's just, he's too disruptive. I get sucked into his dramas and his problems and so forth, and I'm able not, it sort of takes the energy I spend analyzing, processing his dramas is taking away my ability to solve my own problems in my own life. And I realize, the expense that he was exacting from my own life. So anyway, I decided to go to breakfast in Marin, out of the city, and just to, spend a day I'm still recovering from that cold, believe it or not. So I was going to spend a day in the nice hot sun and see if I could get my health in order. So I go to have breakfast at this health food store that's up there. And who do I run into?
Joe.
Joe, out of the blue,
Wow.
this amazing coincidence. And it was like, he was probably literally the last person I wanted to see at that moment.
Yeah.
And so I just got dragged into this thing and listening to the story and just looking for a graceful exit. And I finally found one. And I don't know. So it just pick your associations carefully.
So what do you think about my theory of dialing people up or down in your life instead of just dramatically cutting people off? So if someone is not good for you, like the Joe character that we're talking about now, instead of making a dramatic cutoff, just dial back on the number of interactions you have, dial back the length of time you spend, dial back whether it's in person or over the phone, and dial back the emotional intensity that you bring to these interactions.
Yes, I 100% endorse this, and this is what I've been trying to implement. And then it just seems like fate intervened and just wouldn't have let me turn that dial back, So found it to be a bit amusing.
And the attractive lady?
She's still vaguely in the picture. How can we describe this?
Okay, in the picture, but she hasn't raided your wallet.
No, not yet anyway. But she'd love to, I'm sure. But her mother has sort of taken a shine to me.
Right.
So, which is not the outcome I was looking for.
Yeah.
So then I'm in a sort of awkward situation where it's like, well, if I box her out, then I'm boxing her daughter out, and like, so it's like a package deal. And do I want both?
So this attractive woman, does she touch you unnecessarily? Does she like put her hand on your shoulder or on your
Well, I'll tell you a
knee?
story about this. I'll tell you a story. So this is several weeks ago, maybe 6 weeks ago. So I have this thing where I can let people into my apartment with my phone.
Yeah.
Do you have that buzzer system?
Yeah, I understand it. Yeah.
Okay, so I can buzz people in even if I'm not home.
Yep.
So Joe and the woman in question came by, and he called me and asked me to buzz him into my apartment because he had some stuff he needed to retrieve. And so I did. I buzzed him in, and because I was going to be home in about an hour later than that, and so I would just meet up with him when I got home. And so I got home, and they're in my apartment, and we chit chat, we have fun, we have lunch. It's a jolly time. And things come to an end, and we say our goodbyes. And so later that night I go to bed, and I get into my bed, and there's like this pair of sunglasses in my bed. That aren't mine.
Yeah.
They're women's sunglasses. And I'm like, how does this happen? Like, I don't know. If you understood sort of the tension that's going on here, like this woman somehow managed to get her sunglasses into my bed, and I kept trying to read meaning into this.
Yeah.
Was this intentional, or was this truly an accident? This is the type of thing that hot women create. They create.
Yeah, you think a lot about them.
You think a lot of you read
and
into
you read into things. I was on an True Hollywood Story, and I got an emails from this woman about how captivated she was by my eyes on the show. And so she turned out to be a recruiter, and I met up with her in person, and we spent a few hours together, and then I invited her back to my place, and we had sex and multiple times, and we had like a sexual relationship going for a few weeks, but then she got ticked with me because I wasn't following her direction with my career. And so she wanted to retrieve some jewelry that she'd accidentally left behind in my apartment. And she said, but I'm absolutely not going to have sex with you. I'm just going to stop by and pick up the jewelry. One of my biggest problems with women is that I take them literally. So she came over completely ready, expecting and looking forward to having sex with me. But I went out to the street to meet her and just handed her jewelry to her. And that was the last time I saw her. So if I had simply said, oh yeah, just come in and you can retrieve your jewelry, like off we could go. Or another time, an ex-girlfriend wanted to take me to some event, and she just dressed up to the nines. Like she wore everything that I love, and I didn't make a move on her. I was just taking her literally, but she was, screaming, come take me.
Well, I think you need to do a series on decoding women or decoding hot women.
Yeah. And
the mixed signals are just infinite, and you're in a sort of larger social climate where the wrong move could be very, very costly to you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
definitely.
so it really behooves you to play things very cautiously.
Right. I have found indicators of interest is virtually foolproof. So if a woman doesn't show indicators of interest, meaning touch you unnecessarily, inquire and say things to you that are unnecessary, so beyond the polite, and primp in front of you. So she puts on makeup, she does her hair, right? If she's showing you those indicators of interest, then you can move in for a kiss and you can move on the woman. And I found that absolutely foolproof indicator. And if you're not getting IOIs, indicators of interest, then don't make a move. So,
all right, well, how would you interpret bringing you meals, homemade meals?
Okay, that's definitely an indicator of interest.
Okay.
And also holding your eyes. So one of the worst things is to make a move and move in for a kiss and the woman rejects you. So I'd say 9 out of 10 times that hasn't happened to me, but that 1 out of 10 times was so icky that I don't want to repeat it. And I find if I hold her eyes, so what she's looking at, I'm looking into her eyes, she's looking into mine, and she doesn't look away, then I can just move in for the kiss and never misread it. So there are certain signals that women give off that you can clarify.
Interesting. Yeah, I think this should be your next book, bro. Hey, listen, I'd love to stay and chat, but I'm actually cooking dinner, so
okay,
I
bro.
interrupted cooking to come give you this mini little update.
Okay, thanks. I appreciate it, man.
All right, we'll talk soon.